My contract says staff works for me, I work for you.
Right.
Okay? This is between myself and my staff.
Pretty linear.
They're never ever, so the board is never going to know who said what.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Justin Kroop. I run marketing for Level5, and I'm joined here by Jim McDaniel, CEO of REV Federal Credit Union,
Yes.
Formerly Heritage Trust, which we'll come to in a bit, because I think that for the marketers that are out there and CEOs who are probably considering name changes, which has been a nice trend in the industry for a couple of years, there's always a couple big names that tend to change their brands along the way, and so I think we'll dive into that in a little bit. But thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, I know you're busy. Yeah. It was a good opportunity for us, not being all that far, for Level5 in our Atlanta offices and driving out here through the countryside to join you here in Charleston, South Carolina. And so wanted to also say congrats. You are the very first of this new video series that we're launching, this Fireside chat. And so I think when we were discussing the new idea that we were looking to kick off as a companion piece to some of the case studies that we do that are really more rooted in the facilities or the branches that we do, we were talking amongst ourselves and saying, okay, who could be the first go? And so, of course, your name immediately bubbled up and reached out to you, and you were more than kind with your time and opportunity to come up here. So thanks so much. So let's start off by at least just giving, let's talk about you, which is for some people, obviously a little bit either a great topic or a challenging topic, but I think for the purpose of this series and for the viewers, let's talk about you. Tell us about yourself professionally, maybe even a bit personally, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. Well, actually, I got into the credit union business on the IT side. I was the IT manager of an electric utility back in 1988. Heritage Trust had gone through a very disastrous computer conversion, and the individuals responsible for it were leaving. So I was contacted, and I interviewed for the position. And it just so happens that I had the experience on the hardware they were using as well as the programming language. So in March of 1988, I came to Heritage to try to salvage that computer conversion. And that was an interesting ordeal. And they had bought a really substandard product, unfortunately. But the plan was they wanted to do a lot of in-house programming on it so other credit unions could use it. They will run it kind of like a QSO. Yeah. But the way it was designed, it was never going to work that way. So we got the system stabilized and then ended up converting to another platform 2 years later that was a much better, nationally known.
Is it more of an off-the-shelf that could be customized instead of something a little bit more homegrown?
And it ran on the IBM hardware that they wanted. And, so that's how I got started. Came in as the vice president of management information systems. Then a new president came on board in '89. Long story short, I worked my way up to the senior vice president of administration. I was the number 2 person in the credit union. In 1994, when that president left, I was the interim CEO while the board conducted a search for a new CEO. Brought him on board in November of '94. Around the middle of 1996, I left here and went to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina to be the president and CEO of Carolina Trust Federal Credit Union, which previously had been the Myrtle Beach Air Force Base Credit Union. And that base had just been shut down by BRAC. So it was an interesting time with the regulators because NCUA didn't think that the credit union could survive without its primary sponsor. So the board there, who were all retired Air Force fighter pilots, with the exception of one gentleman who was a bomber pilot. They never surrendered anything, and they weren't going to surrender their credit union. So that was an interesting time there, redesigning, rebranding the credit union to be not so dependent on the Air Force, but now reaching out into the community. Right. When I went there, we were about 66 million in assets, and when I left, we had doubled the size of the credit union, expanded out multiple counties. So, and it's still a very viable credit union today. 2005, I returned to Heritage Trust. Again, they were in some, let's just say, hot water with the regulator.
Okay.
Field examiners were recommending that a credit union basically be merged. The regional administrator at that time wanted to give us a chance. So basically, I was given 2 years to either get it back on its feet or they would merge it.
Wow.
So that was 2005. Here it is, 2020.
Yeah.
And we're alive and well, more than double the size of the assets of the credit union, expanded the branches,
Sure.
rebranded the credit union
Yeah.
for the next decades.
So we'll come to that in a bit. Obviously, it's a pretty good track record as far as being able to hang your hat pretty firmly on distressed, say, institutions and being able to sort of find the way. Was there something that you had done along the way in both those instances that was perhaps similar? Obviously, the situations were unique unto themselves. Was there a common thread maybe in both of those turnarounds? Or was it really more maybe something internal that was operationally that you needed to address?
Well, there were operational issues, no doubt. And a lot of it was just common sense to look at something that wasn't right and then go about addressing it and fixing it. I was fortunate in Myrtle Beach to have a very strong board who supported the changes.
Good.
And actually worked alongside myself and my management team to make those changes, to take it from being almost the best kept secret in Myrtle Beach to being one of the premier financial institutions there in the Myrtle Beach area.
Okay.
Coming here, it was somewhat different. There were a lot of issues, but having been here before and really stayed in touch with key individuals here from 1996 to the time I came back, I knew a lot about what was happening here. I knew where the problems were before I got here.
Right.
And I knew some things that had to be addressed immediately. And a lot of it had to be personnel and direction.
Sure.
The credit union had unfortunately gotten out of the retail business and was trying to become the indirect car credit union, in the Charleston market.
Sure.
And it snake bit them. And the financials were showing that, and the regulators came in and did their thorough study because they found assets were growing dramatically, but the net worth was shrinking. They weren't making any money. So they called in an accounting firm, had a great deal of expertise in credit unions, and they looked this place over with a fine-tooth comb and basically found that, for lack of better terminology, management was cooking the books to try to make it look better financially, and they had no capital restoration plan in place, anything along that line, and actually were pushing back on the regulator about it. So, so naturally, when I came back, in the interview with the committee, I think I was able to tell them some things about their credit union that even they weren't aware of. So, so when I came back,
did you think you had a suspicion that maybe that may have been the case, or when you became privy to the audit and the findings and the recommendations, was it just as shocking to you as maybe the rest?
Not so much shocking.
Yeah.
I guess it validated what I thought.
That's what I was wondering.
So I knew that, number one, they had to get back into the retail business, which was going to be difficult.
Sure.
And there was going to be the need for some major staff changes. And that was probably the hardest thing for a lot of people to accept, that there needed to be new thought processes, new people, new ideas, new managers particularly.
Right.
So one of the things I did when I got back that I was told by several folks not to do, but I put together what we called a resolutions committee, because I knew that front office and back office weren't communicating with one another. We had VPs that weren't talking to each other, and knowing full well that I could come back in with my ideas, and try to implement them, but they're always going to be my ideas. However, if those ideas came from the staff and the people who are here, even though they're my ideas, they're more apt to carry them out.
Little CEO magic trick.
So the resolutions committee, and I didn't tell them this at the time when I formed it, was made up of people who had largely been identified as the weakest links, troublemakers for the lack of better terminology, plus folks that have been identified as the real folks who love this credit union and love this membership, and really wanted the best for the credit union. Pretty much let them write up their own charter, make their own rules, hold their own meetings. They could do it after hours if they needed to. If they needed to have dinner, we would pay for it as long as it was reasonable.
Sure.
But what they were to do is to identify the issues and then come up with the resolutions and then present those back to my senior management team with an idea that we may or may not implement them, but you're going to identify a problem and come up with a resolution.
Give them a sense of ownership and execution.
They got to pick their team leader, and they got to hold each other accountable. And I told everybody in the committee, it would not be a career-enhancing move if you got voted off the island by the other members of the committee.
Right.
If you were not pulling your weight, you didn't attend the meetings, or you were just a thorn in everybody's side, they voted you off the island, you were gone, There was no recourse, no appeal, you're gone, off the committee. We'll worry about your career later, And I only had 2 people got voted off the island. But one of the things that I knew before I got back, when I accepted the position, I got a list of all the employees' names and their home addresses. I wrote every one of them. It was a personal letter, but they all got the same letter. And it explained who I was, what I expected when I got back, and some things directions we needed to take. But I gave them like 10 open-ended questions for them to answer. What do you like about the credit union? What you don't like? What you change? What's been your biggest success? What's been your biggest failure? How you wouldn't let that happen again? Tell me a little bit more about yourself. And if you could be the boss for a day, what would you change? What would you do differently? And they're all open-ended. And I did it in such a manner that the letters came from me with my Myrtle Beach address. There was a self-addressed stamped envelope inside that. They could put their responses in and mail it back to me at my Myrtle Beach self-addressed stamped envelope, address, Nobody in the credit union was going to see their responses but me, I got great responses back. And I sat down and I compiled everything those folks had to say.
That's great.
And I came up with a list of about 135 projects that needed to be addressed that staff had identified. And I matched them up to the ones that I already knew about.
First of all, that's a fantastic idea. I think anybody that's watching this, particularly at the executive level or C-level, I'm sure are taking notes on this. In you coming up with that idea, did you have an idea or a hypothesis on where you thought it would go? And or do you think that the openness would maybe also inevitably uncover something that hadn't been rooted out before?
That was the other thing.
So from your perspective, what were you fishing at something, and or were you
combination?
Okay.
Because I've always felt, and I've always tried to tell the staff, some of the best ideas in this organization are going to come from the frontline staff. Because you're dealing with the members on a daily basis. I'm not. And I want you to be able to tell me what they are. But the initial, knowing only had 2 years, that we had to be back to making money, we had to get our Camel ratings back, and we had to make certain that the reputation of the organization within the community was still solid. So by having that list, what those folks told me, a lot I already knew, a good many things that I hadn't dug deep enough yet, to find, but also where the problem children were.
Right.
Okay. So when they came back with their report, and it was rather lengthy, and they, with all due respect, they were scared to death when they sat down with us to give us the report.
Mm-hmm.
And I told my senior staff, no comments, let them talk.
Sure.
Okay, let them talk. Of course, keep in mind, I had to bring in, by this time, I brought in 2 new senior vice presidents at that time. I had 1 senior vice president that I inherited, okay, and myself, so it was just the 4 of us.
Okay.
I said, let them talk, okay? Because 3 of us are new. We don't have any vested interest per se in what happened,
Sure.
okay? I had 1 senior vice president who was very much part of that, very sensitive. The person was very sensitive of the fact they didn't get to see the responses because they wanted to compile them and give them to me. And I said, nobody's going to see them.
No.
Okay? Not even the board got to see them,
Right.
which angered my board chairman. Okay?
That's interesting.
Yeah, because he said, I didn't get permission to do it. I said, I don't need permission. My contract says staff works for me. I work for you.
Right.
Okay? This is between myself and my staff.
Pretty linear.
They're never, ever, I said, the board is never going to know who said what. Okay? They just want to see the report.
That's a great way to approach it.
So I had the, I was the pincushion, but I had to be the barrier because I told the staff this would be confidential.
Right.
And if I knew anything leaked out, I would have destroyed my credibility.
Well, to that point, and tell me if I'm off base here, I think based on what it was you were probably looking to unfold in that manner, there is the element of secrecy or privacy maybe in respecting that, because while you may have probably thought that part of the opportunity or the need to break down some of those silos maybe inevitably was going to result in some people needing to depart.
Oh, yeah.
The folks that also equally or more so were going to stay, you would never want there to be some ill will or bad taste in their mouth from a legacy perspective.
Exactly. And one of the things that did come out of that, because the credit union used a consultant to do team building for a decade, okay? And when word got to this person that I was putting this committee together, that person came to me and said, "You have this could blow up in your face." I said, "Well, it can, but at this point, what do we got to lose?"
Right.
Okay. But I said, "I don't think it will." I said, I've having those responses before I got here. I knew there were people who knew where the problems were. They felt helpless, powerless to do anything about it. But they were willing not to rat somebody out, but to say, this is an issue here.
Right.
Okay. And my vice president, I've been told by my VP, do not talk to anybody under this other person's VP. And I said, we can't have that.
Right.
Cannot have that. But what came out of that, not only every idea they gave me, and when they finished, okay, I let them know. When they went through their exhaustive list, I said, folks, I commend you for all your hard work.
Yeah.
But you know something? You haven't said anything I didn't already know. Okay. But now we got to put it in place.
Right.
Okay. So, and we did. And I had people come out of that committee and said, I was scared to death when I went in. Okay. Because there are people in that room I haven't talked to, and they haven't talked to me in years. I don't know how it's going to come out. But we were forced to break the barriers down and start talking to each other. And it worked. It really did work. The only thing was, the one question they asked me, I told them I would not give them the answer to, said, how was I selected for this committee? And I said, you either identified as a troublemaker, not carrying your weight, or somebody who really loved this organization, okay, and wanted to see the best for it. I'm just not going to tell you which category you fell in.
Those are pretty polar ends, but
chances are you already know the answer to that question. So, so that gave us a list to start working on to prioritize things, and that's where a lot of the ideas what needed to be fixed.
Sure.
So, my thought has always been, I remember back to my days of taking chemistry. Okay. A chemical bond is only as strong as its weakest link, okay? And management, okay? The management of an organization is only as good as its weakest link.
Sure.
Staff is only as good as the weakest link. The CEO of an organization this size can't know it all. So my theory has always been to hire the best people I can, let them do their jobs.
Yeah.
Okay. Stay informed, guide them, coach them. But they're the experts. They're subject matter experts. Let them do their jobs. So you hire the best people you can, let them do their jobs,
Sure.
and don't micromanage them. Okay.
That's a good lesson.
And that worked here. And long story short, we got our Camel rating increased after 6 months. We were from under the LUA in 12 months.
That's great.
And we were back 2 years, we were fine.
So going back to something you had said a second ago or a couple minutes ago about your re-entry into the role and identifying those 135 plus or minus tasks or projects or whatever the case may be. That's a lot. That's a lot. Obviously, it worked out. How do you prioritize that? Was that something that you took control of as somebody sort of overseeing the idea, or did you sort of allow the committee that you had formed to sort of prioritize?
I allowed the committee to prioritize what they had, and then I told them that our senior team would go through them and look at what we had, and then we would get back to the group and say, this is the order in which we're going to attack these things. Okay. And there was a lot of overlap in that what I saw as a priority, because number one was financial. That was the main thing. And also something that staff had no control over, and that was there had to be major, major change in philosophy on the board level. And that was my job.
Okay. Hey, to stay in tune with what we've got coming up next week or the weeks thereafter, hit that subscribe button. That bell button is going to notify you every time we drop a new video. Enjoy the next one.